Yeah, let's get started. Good afternoon, everyone. Again, I'm Zara, part of UNESCO's disaster risk reduction team, coming to you from Germany with luckily nice weather today. I would like to welcome everyone and thank you all for joining us for our webinar on assessing nature-based solutions to climate change, which is jointly hosted by OPERANDUM and UNESCO. The OPERANDUM project is funded by the EU within the Horizon 2020 program, which is the largest EU research and innovation program. The project was launched in 2018 and essentially aims to reduce environmental risks in rural territories through innovative nature-based solutions that are co-created, tested and demonstrated in various sites throughout Europe and beyond. You'll learn more about the project and what this work looks like in more detail in a minute when I pass the floor to our speakers. Before we start, again, I would just mention to all participants, please share your questions or comments in the chat box, which we will collect and pass on to the speakers at the end of the webinar during a Q&A session. So at any time, if you have a question, just post it in the chat. You can address the question to a specific speaker or just ask a general question. Should you for some reason not be able to access the chat box, feel free to email us your question using the contact address given in the registration email. I will also share it here in the chat. So let me introduce our speakers now, who are all part of the OPERANDUM project. I will start with Professor Prashant Kumar. Prashant is a professor and chair in air quality and health, founding director of the Global Centre for Clean Air Research at the University of Surrey and an adjunct professor at Trinity College Dublin. His multidisciplinary research builds an interface between air pollution, health and climate change. He has supervised over 25 PhDs and postdocs, published over 200 journal articles, attracting nearly 8,000 citations. He has successfully managed over £8 million of individual research funding from the GCARE Horizon 2020 and from industry and international bodies. He serves the editorial board of several journals and reviews and advises as a panel member many funding agencies worldwide. He was convening Royal Society's rapid assistance in modeling the pandemic subgroup on COVID-19, and his research is featured in popular media outlets such as the BBC and The Times. So thank you very much for joining us today, Prashant. Next, I would like to introduce Dr. Sisay Debele, who is a research fellow in the OPERANDUM project, also affiliated with the Global Centre for Clean Air Research and the Department of Civil and Environmental Engineering at the University of Surrey. Before joining OPERANDUM, Sisay worked as a research assistant in a Polish-Norwegian project focused on climate change impacts on hydrological extremes at the Polish Academy of Sciences in Warsaw. He received a PhD in the field of earth sciences in the discipline of geophysics and majored in statistical hydrology at the Institute of Geophysics of the Polish Academy of Sciences. He holds 2 master's degrees in hydrology and meteorology, and he published over 10 articles in top-ranked journals in the field of climate change, hydrological extremes, risk estimation, and nature-based solutions. So thanks a lot to Sisay for joining us. We look forward to hearing your results. And last but not least, I would like to welcome our third speaker, Dr. Antti Mäkelä, who has worked at the Finnish Meteorological Institute, FMI, since 2001. He finalized his in 2011 regarding severe weather occurrence in Northern Europe. During the years, he has been involved in FMI's capacity building projects in developing countries such as Nepal, Bhutan, Vietnam, and Sri Lanka, where he has trained the local meteorologists to observe and better forecast severe weather events. At the moment, he's leading a research group focused on climate change impacts and changes in the extremes, especially in Finland. Besides capacity building work, Antti loves to hold lectures and presentations on climate change for the general public, translating the science to non-scientists. So thanks also to Antti for being a part of this event. And with that, I will pass the floor to Prashant to begin the presentation. So please go ahead, Prashant.
Thank you very much, Jara, and I hope that you can see the screen. Yeah.
Yes, we see. We can.
Okay, so first of all, thank you everyone for joining this webinar. This is one of those first webinars of OPERANDUM. So what we'll be doing is we'll be discussing actually some of the work which we have done as part of the project in the very early work packages. So this is mainly to provide actually some of the the findings of the preliminary work. So as you can sense from the title, actually, so we'll be talking quite a lot of the the basics related to the benefits, barriers, and the best practices for the nature-based solutions. So we have 3 speakers, as already noted by Jahara, and we all will be kind of swapping in between the presentations. So and I will you will see, the other colleagues are talking. But before I go on to the slides, actually, so I would like to acknowledge a number of the project partners who have contributed to the work. So we are basically the voice of many of these colleagues who have worked tirelessly on these work packages throughout the project. So there are a number of these organizations. You can see the logo of them and the colleagues actually who have contributed to these deliverables, as well as the publications which we'll be kind of mentioning through this presentation. So the outline of this presentation is basically try to give the basic concepts of the nature-based solutions. Why do we need it? Or what are the benefits of using them? What kind of challenges have? And then how we can foster the wider application of the nature-based solutions with the following, with the summary conclusions and the way forward. So what you will see is mainly looking into some of the basics, but then some of the interesting things in terms of how these nature-based solutions are being deployed all around the world, and how we can kind of contribute actually to this development. So since the topic is nature-based solutions, so as it says that it has something to do with the nature, which are and there has been these definitions. So one is by the International Union for Conservation of Nature, which says that the nature-based solutions are the actions to protect, sustainably manage, and restore natural or modified ecosystems which address societal challenges, which could include basically the climate change, food and water security, or the natural disasters, effectively and adaptively, while simultaneously providing human well-being and biodiversity impacts. So the nature-based solutions, basically, they could be used for the different societal challenges. But as part of the operandum, the climate change and the natural disasters are the 2 kind of pillars which are being which have been addressed. And in that context, actually, the most of the presentation you will see, and most of the project is around them. So the European Council, they say that these are nature-based solutions to societal challenges, solutions that are inspired and supported by nature, which are cost-effective, provide environmental, societal, and economic benefits, and the health resilience. So in simple terms, basically, you could think of using the nature to fight against the natural hazards. So it's basically playing one against another by planning, managing, and implementing in such a way that the benefits of them can be reaped in a positive way. So if you think of the disaster risk management perspective, so for example, we got the 2 sides of it. So one is basically the crisis management. So for example, if something happens in terms of the flooding or any kind of natural hazards, so one of the things one has to look into is the crisis management. So you're thinking about the response and recovery. You're thinking about how you can rescue, reconstruct, or rehabilitate actually the people who are affected. But the another side of it is the prevention of that risk. So how you can prevent actually the risk. It can include a number of those things that can include the identification, analysis, and evaluation, policy planning, and implementation. But this is where these nature-based solutions comes into practice, because you could use actually these nature-based solutions to kind of prevent the risk. And there are a number of these approaches which are used, in that response. So the most of the focus of this presentation will remain actually on this green and the prevention kind of an area, moving forward from here. So this is a kind of a representation of what we are having in and around us. So for example, we got the atmosphere where the air is, we got the hydrosphere, all the water kind of bodies, the geosphere, which relates to the soil, and the biosphere, which relates to basically all these biological kind of the activities. But there is a kind of the balance of the energy. And we all know about the climate change, which is kind of driven by the global warming. So if the radiation from the sun is arriving to the earth and is trapping more heat actually, then it can send it back. That means then there are positive kind of the impact in terms of increasing the global warming. But then there is a other side of it is the kind of the negative feedback. So for example, if you are kind of consuming more of this heat through the so there are the sinks basically in terms of the CO2, which is by the green infrastructure, and the blue kind of the water bodies, which include the oceans. So what happens is, like, if you have a positive the feedback, so it means you are having more energy trapped actually into the system, then that can cause the formation of the hydrometeorological hazards. And those hazards could include the floods, droughts, heat waves, storm surge, landslides, heat waves, and these kind of are dealt actually as part of the OPERANDUM project, and they could relate easily to two of those things, which could include the water bodies, which is the oceans and the hydrospheric conditions, as well as the wind, which could include the anomalous the atmospheric conditions. But then the right hand side of the circle is then where you can regulate basically these hazards. So regulating these hazards, then here comes the the role of these nature-based solutions, which can reduce the probability, the propagation probability, as well as the intensity of this the hydrometeorological hazards or these risks. So I'm going to give actually some of the examples of these things as moving forward. But before going that, it's quite complex process. So it looks simple in a way, but if you think of the connections between different the components, it makes it quite complicated. So in a way, what you're seeing on the top actually is the circle, is the same circle which I showed you earlier in terms of the positive and the negative kind of feedbacks, and then you introduce actually the different the solutions for for fighting against these the nature-based solutions, and those could include the hybrid approaches, so which is basically the mixed approaches. Can have the gray approach, which is mainly to do with the with building up the engineering structures. The blue approaches, which could include basically the water bodies, and the green approaches. So all of these actually, especially the green and the blue and the hybrid approaches, are being kind of used as part of the OPERANDUM project, and this is where the focus of this current things lies as well. So if you go in more detail, so if you think about the gray approaches, so what we are talking about is the engineering structure. So for example, you're building the dams, you're building the barriers, which is using cement, concrete, steel, and in all the conventional materials. So there are positives and negatives of it. So that includes basically firstly, these structures are quite expensive to build. The other issue is that they have a limited time frame. So the sustainability in longer term frame is remains a challenge. If there is a failure of these, then that can bring actually a more catastrophic impact. And usually they are single objective oriented design. So for example, if I need to stop the flood or the water, so I'm just building actually a barrier. So I'm not thinking about the biodiversity or the other long-term influences on the ecosystem. But the positives of that is there are well-established, the approaches. So the engineering of them is well-established. The methods are well-established. We know how to design them. So this basically brings, the kind of the preference, in many cases that let's use them because we got, everything what we need to know about these structures, and they can be implemented. But then comes the nature-based solutions as a kind of an complementary approaches or the alternates in some positions, which could include the hybrid or the natural solutions. So the benefit of them is, first of all, what you're using is the natural or the nature against the nature. So in a way, what you're talking about is using the plants or the water bodies or other things in a more designed way, so that they tend to be the cost effective and the resource efficient. They can build the resilience and the sustainability. They could be flexible. And there could be a multifunctional. So it's not just that it's just saving, basically, let's say, the flow of the water in terms of the floods or the landslides, actually, in terms of, if you're putting some, the green infrastructure and so on. But they are also environmental friendly, and they can bring actually the more diverse benefits as compared to what you can think of the grey infrastructure. But there are downsides of it as well. So first of all, the practices are not that established. So the examples actually which people can follow. So there is still quite a lot of need actually to develop the science and its outreach actually to the planners or to the people who are implementing them. So in a way, so they both has got their own the pros and cons. But going forward and looking into preserving the natural resources and fighting against the climate change. So they are one of those preferred ways actually to consider in future. So this is a very lovely slide actually, which gives the example of the nature-based solutions which I have been talking about. So if you just start from on the top, so we're talking about a simple measure is a flood bypass, and that can redirect flood waters around a community without reducing the natural connectivity of a river, and then can reduce basically the flood risk. You can think of the floodplain vegetation. So what it can do is it can slow down and store the flood waters and reduce the risk of erosion and the flood risk. It could be the open space, that can regulate the air and water flows and decrease urban floods and the heat waves. There is a mangrove belt that have been found actually to reduce almost up to 66% of the wave height, and that can be effective in terms of the storm surge, coastal flooding, and the coastal erosion. There could be these the coastal marshes that can be used and the coastal flooding, seagrasses, which is quite the interesting things which exist actually in the nature all over the place, and that could be very effective in the coastal erosion and the landslides. Coral reefs could be another an example of the kind of the blue and the systems for the NBS that can decrease the storm surge and the coastal flooding. The parks actually, so you are having them all around you actually, so they can do quite a lot of bits. Firstly, to have the heat waves, reducing the heat wave. The secondly, the flooding of the water, because they can slow down actually the flow of the water. A number of the other benefits, which is the mental health and well-being, and the trees basically benefiting from the air pollution perspective. The same thing is similar example is for the reef restoration, which is more to do with the storm surge and the coastal flooding. The oyster reefs that could be again quite effective in terms of the coastal flooding. The coastal habitats like these marshes that can also work for the storm surge and the coastal flooding. And then there are other examples of the beaches and dunes and the which can benefit actually some of those these natural hazards. So number of these actually are being used as part of the project where a number of our collaborators are kind of working on their implementation, their design, and the testing. So they do exist actually in the nature. It's just that they need the properly designed and kind of exploiting their benefit and their potential for the use of fighting against these solutions. Now there is so these were kind of the general examples. Now this is an example of a real world example in Republic of China, where you could see there was a park. So if you look at the pictures on the left, so which is the pre-existing in 2011. and you had then these nature-based solutions been implemented. So you can see how this has been kind of transformed on the right, and then this is a top view actually, which you're looking, on the bottom. So sometimes you can target, or these are targeted actually for certain risks. So in this case, it was more of the floods and the river flood, in this particular area. And there is a hybrid approaches which has been used, which includes basically the wetlands and the terraced embankments, which includes basically the lot of this, the area where there are plants being kind of, they put it in. Then biowhales and the green pockets, which you can see here, the yellow, on the second picture. It only took like a year, and if you try to kind of map it against the United Nations, the SDGs, which is the Sustainable Development Goals, then it can help with the climate resistance and the green space management. And by looking at some of these the key performance indicators that shows that it has reduced actually the flood decreased by 60%. And the benefits they are bringing is in terms of the accessibility to the green open spaces, because if this kind of the things are there, then it will always motivate actually people to go and visit those places, increase the amount of green open spaces for the residents, and increase the well-being. But these are like a few things. But what we have done is, as part of the project, where you could visit actually this GeoIKP, which is being developed as part of this the OPERANDUM project, and there will be more detailed talks around them. But where you can find several of these these case studies, which we kind of try to gather from all over the world and try to harmonize that information. This is another example, which is in Europe, in Italy, in Milan. This is an example of a vertical garden where you can see loads of these, the green infrastructure, around it. So the type of NBS being used here includes the green walls and the green roofs. The target was enhancing the sustainable urbanization, increasing carbon sequestration through these, the greening of these plants, and developing the climate change mitigation. So some of these, apart from the water management, so what's happening is that if you have a extreme rainfall, then they can slow down actually, the water percolating on the road, and then can reduce basically the peak intensity of these floods. And some of these KPIs for that is regulating the microclimate, which can include the humidity and the temperature, and that could help actually in terms of reducing the heat waves, absorb CO2 and the dust. So this is another kind of ecosystem services you're getting in terms of reducing the air pollution, protecting people and houses from the the sun rays. So this could be another kind of an added benefit, protect from the acoustic and the air pollution, the regulate water and reduce the risk of urban flooding. So of course I'm talking about all these the positive things about them, and always there is a when there are positives, so there are some downsides in there, but there is a balance actually in order to understand what can be done, and there are real world examples which are existing around us, in different parts of the world. So what I'm going to do now is I'm passing on to my colleague, Antti, and he will talk about some of the trends about the climate extremes and so on. So Antti, over to you.
Yes, thank you, Prashant. Really good starting for the webinar. And hello, so I'm Antti Mäkelä from Finnish Meteorological Institute, and I continue here with I go first a bit backwards in the just overall picture of the climate change, and what should we first understand about it. We all know, I'm quite sure that we all have read and we have some opinion about how climate will change, but it's important to also understand that climate has changed already quite a lot, especially during the past few decades. And here is a one really good example of that, or not example, but just a figure which points that out. So how much each individual year has been warmer than the 20th century average annual global mean temperature. And as we can see, the closer we come to the present day, each year almost has been warmer than the previous one, and we can see a quite steep increase in the global mean temperatures, so this picture is regarding the global land and ocean mean temperatures. Okay, then next one, Prashant, please. So climate has changed already, and then if we want to examine, okay, how does the change continue, and in this case according to the global mean temperatures, and there we have the climate model outputs that we can use for estimating how the climate warming will evolve depending on how the human greenhouse gas emissions evolve, because that gives the main uncertainty how the future looks like. So how much of these emissions will be emitted into the atmosphere in the coming years. And in this picture, this is from the UN's International Panel on Climate Change material. So this red color area represents I would say the business as usual scenario. So it is called the RCP 8.5 scenario. And so if the emissions continue to develop as of now at present, then the future at the end of the century is something like let's say 3.5 to even 6 degrees warmer than compared to the pre-industrial time. But then this blue color represents if this UN 1.5 degree a decision is considered, each country considers that important, and there is a really big reductions in emissions, it is possible that during this century the warming declines and will not go above the 1.5 Celsius degrees. And so now very often when there is a lecture about climate change and then showing this picture, then usually from the audience somebody asks, okay, what will be the temperature change at the end of this century or at the mid of this century? And I have to say, I don't know. It is something between these two totally opposite scenarios. And what will happen depends on the emissions eventually. And that's really important to understand. Okay, next one. Okay, then for example, especially in the OPERANDUM project, we are dealing with the extremes. And I can say that the extremes are the ones which usually cause the most of the problems. And first of all, it's important to understand what is actually extreme, because at least here in Finland, in the media, some extreme weather is often referred to as a certain really intense storm, let's say really intense thunderstorm, which caused a lot of damage or so. But there is actually no single one definition what is an extreme weather event. And here are some examples or some definitions that can be used for this. So one really easy one is the maximum or minimum. So the smallest and largest value in the distribution of that variable. Then, for example, the city planners or insurance companies, they often use this kind of frequency of occurrences or return period. So, for example, how often a certain severe precipitation event occurs in the city of Helsinki or city of Bologna or any location, and then they base their planning on that certain value. And then one way of defining extreme is the impacts. So because we don't have exact observations of all weather events in the world. For example, hurricanes are really difficult to measure in the same way as, let's say, the temperature in the center of Helsinki. So, but because hurricanes cause a lot of damages, so based on the impacts, also we can say whether this event was extreme or not. And so please remember after this webinar, so that basically each weather variable or weather event, they have their own distribution of occurrence or intensity of distribution. And from that distribution, you can say that, okay, this part of the distribution can be considered as extreme. Okay, next one. Then this is, I have noted this is a really good example, really simple but really good example of how the climate change impacts the extremes. And especially regarding the temperatures, extreme temperatures, this example works really well because temperature is the one that actually changes when we are talking about the climate change and global warming. So there is a direct effect on the temperatures. And now let's consider that this distribution, which you can see in the graph on the left side, this current climate, let's say it is from the Central Park of Paris. It's 30 years of temperature, daily temperature observations from 30 years, and we have calculated the temperature distribution for that location. Okay, then we have a climate model data, and we can draw similar distribution for, let's say, in the mid of this century. And what we can see that what we can see is that the distribution, if the mean annual temperature in the future is, let's say, 3 degrees warmer than at the present climate, the distribution changes, moves to the right, to the warmer side, and that has a huge impact on the tails of the distribution. You can see that in the previous climate or present climate, current climate, especially those really cold episodes or cold temperatures, they become much less frequent, while the more extreme hot temperatures become more frequent, and even new extreme or maximum temperatures are foreseen. So this is a good example to understand. Then next one, please, Prashant. But then for some other weather event, let's say heavy precipitation, the situation is not that trivial or not that easy, because first of all, for all weather events, we are not exactly, first of all, sure how the change in the temperatures, global temperatures, affects that, especially in a certain specific location and so on. But this is example for the heavy precipitation events in the southern Finland, and how, according to two different emission scenarios, the blue one is the RCP 4.5, the red one is the RCP 8.5. So the 8.5 is the, let's say, the pessimistic scenario of all of these emission scenarios. And so we can see changes compared to the current climate, which is the black curve. And this picture shows the return period values for the precipitation in millimeters. And what we can see that at the end of the century, in the southern Finland, what heavy precipitation event we have occurring once in about 20 years. In the end of the century, we have that same case occurring once in 10 years. And for the even much more rare case, one in 100 years in our current climate precipitation event, we have that occurring in the future once in 30 years approximately. And this we also use and exploit in the OPERANDUM project for when we are designing and considering the nature-based solutions, because we have to take into account the changing climate as well. So if we design some solution which works now, we have to be sure that it works also in 50 years. Okay, next one. So here is a quite simple graph of how, let's say, weather data in general, how it can be used to support in climate change and adaptation or planning of nature-based solutions and so on. So how, like in the previous slide I mentioned, so we have to first consider what are the risks and hazards in my area of interest in the present climate. What has happened, what the events have caused, what is the problem, how often these hazards occur, and so on. And for example, what has been the worst case, what has happened, and so on. And then we collect whatever we have information, data of those events. And then we also take into account how, at the best understanding we know, how does the climate change impact the occurrence of these hazards in that specific location. And these actually then provide the design and development requirements for the NBS implementation regarding the climate hazards. Of course, there can be also other hazards than climate hazards, but this is regards the climate hazards. Okay, next one. Okay, yes, and okay, this is in the OPERANDUM project. This is our open air laboratory or the case in Finland. We have a lot of forests. The forestry is big business for the whole Finnish society and economy. And during the past, I would say more than 100 years, something like that, the forests have been placed, or forest grows in an area which has been really wet, like swamp areas. And we have placed a lot of ditches to dry the soil so that the trees are better. And that has worked well. We have even more and more forests now in the Finnish country. But we had not realized that actually that causes a lot of problems, because now from these ditches, now because the winters have become in Finland quite non-winter-like, there is precipitation in liquid form more and more. A lot of nutrition flow from these via these ditches to lakes, and there is a lot of much more nutrition and sediments flowing to the lakes, and the lakes are getting poorer and poorer in condition, and that causes a lot of different, lot of new challenges which we now try to tackle. And here is in the right-hand side of the slide, you can see this kind of like flow of examination in the OPERANDUM project. So first, the challenge or the problem is that there is the poor water quality due to these nutrition and sediment flows. We now make measurements of the water quality and local weather and what is the interlinkage between each other. What are the most critical episodes? When have those happened and what happened and so on? Then we simulate. That's important because we cannot measure in too detailed, so simulations are essential. And then we simulate also, like if we would place this kind of nature-based solution here, what is the impact of that solution? And then we also add the climate change, so whether this solution would work also in the future climate. And then we have actually developed the design requirements of the NBS. And of course, there should be continuous monitoring to see if it actually works and so on. Okay, then I think I have one more slide. And just the example, what we are expecting from these nature-based solutions in our open air laboratory. We are hoping to get the improved water quality in the long term, reduced eutrophication of the lake, biodiversity conservation, increase in nature-based tourism, because if the lake and region is in a better shape, that is especially good for the nature-based tourism. And also recreation, positive effects on the fishing, both to the quantity and quality of the fishes, and generally overall improved human well-being. So hopefully I managed to make it in a way how the climate information and weather data can be and should be used in designing these nature-based solutions. Thank you.
So thank you very much, Antti. So I'm passing on to my colleague, Dr. Cesar Dabele. So he will be talking about some of these analysis around these climate streams and the hydrometeorological hazard indicators. So Cesar, over to you.
Thank you, Professor Prashant and Dr. Antti. As Antti already explained, nowadays climate change already shifted the first and the second central moments of the climate variables. So this is almost to give you the overall big picture what Antti presented so far. As you can see from these figures, precipitation and the temperature, which are the two most indicators for the triggering hydrometeorological hazards, are projected to increase over Europe. For example, the left panel figure, annual distribution of the precipitation, which is from RCP 8.5, showing increasing annual mean precipitation is large in large part of Central and Northern Europe. It's up to 30%, whereas there is a decrease in the Southern Europe up to 40%, and also in southern region, precipitation decreases to the northward. What it means to the hazards related to those indicators? For example, when precipitation is too high, it will trigger floods. Then flood can trigger landslides. They are a kind of cascades. One triggers others and making a huge impact. So this is the first two figures are to show you precipitation is showing, as Antti told, it is not the distribution is unevenly distributed, but the overall picture is giving us increment and a decrement to some region across Europe. In the same way, temperatures as well shows different patterns under RCP 4.5 and 8.5. As you can see from the pictures, this is compared with the historical time period with the projection. So when we see the historical time period 1971 till 22, or we call it, this one is a control period. So when we compare the temperature, RCP 0.85 produce extremes. High temperature is expected to or projected to increase between 2.7 to 6.2 degrees centigrade under RCP 8.5, while RCP 4.8 projected to increase the temperature 1.4 to 4.2 degrees centigrade. What it does mean this to the again to the hydrometeorological hazards. For example, increment in temperature will brought uncomfortable temperature. That means heat waves. Following those heat waves, soil moisture drought will trigger. Following this, then it will trigger like wildfires. So this is to show you what it looks like, the triggering factor or the indicators it looks like in future. Next slide, please. So we already said that climate changes are triggering risks. So let's have a quick overview of what is risk. Risk is just defined as a product of hazard, exposure, and vulnerability. Hazard is mostly characterized by onset probability, propagation probability. It propagates to reach an element with some intensity that when it reaches to the element with some intensity, we call it the exposure of an property, maybe houses. When it starts making the impact or negative damages, that means vulnerability, the damage of life, damage of property. So risk is a product of three components, or in other way around, we can say risk is the product of probability and the consequences, where consequence is the product of exposure times vulnerability. Next slide, please. If you want to have a look more about the methods, definition of risks, to evaluate risk, hydrometeorological risks and their management through NBS, we would recommend you to read this paper, Sahani et al. So it's a nice paper, which is an open access. Next slide, please, Prashant. So again, so we have seen now the risks are increasing. So what is the impact of this risk or damage? So this gives to give you an overall damages caused by risks across the world. For example, what is the trends looks like? For example, economical loss across the world is from 1918 till 2019. The weather and the extremes caused a damage around 5,200 billion USA dollars. The second figure also showing you the damages caused by the weather disaster in EU. So next. Yeah, thank you. So overall, natural hazard in Europe caused losses more than 618 billion euro between 1980 till 2018. What about the projections? What it say? The projection is also saying between 2011 till 2040, the losses are increasing between 25% and between 40 till 70, it will increase about 61%. So as a researcher or as a scientist, what we can do, then we are looking at Professor Prashant already presented the potential and capability of nature-based solution. So nature-based solution can respond to such crises, to such damages. So next slide, please. So this is also the impact of natural hazards across Europe. The first figure shows you the economic losses, loss of life, A. The figure B shows you economic damages. So the second, the last row, figure C and the figure D is showing also the same thing, but the around 7 countries where we have OPERANDUM oils. Of the when we came to the hydrometeorological hazards, previously we have seen all natural hazards, but now when we came to the hydrometeorological hazards, most of them, they cause high impact. For example, flood is the most, followed by storm surge or storms, drought, heat waves, and the landslide across Europe. This is across Europe. If it is across the world, earthquake is ranked in the first place, which is in Asian continent. So of the hydrometeorological hazards, flood causes largest economic loss around 76%, followed by the droughts and heat waves. So if you wanted to read this kind of information, so I will refer you to the paper Kumar et al. 2020. Next slide, please. So now how NBS can respond to this, and what we are doing so far, and still what we are doing. For example, in OPERANDUM, what we are doing is we are building science-based evidence for the usability, for the application, upscaling of the nature-based solution against hydrometeorological hazards, as well as to different natural hazards or anything else that can be applicable for the nature-based solutions. So in this figure, to show you, since 2015, several projects across EU and around 8 key databases and platforms are working to increase the wider uptake of NBS across worlds. So the trend is showing that it's from 2015 to 2015, most of the projects are working toward and ending in 2023. Then what will after that? It will depend on the project funded by now and then. We will never know what will happen because in the current situation, as earlier presented by Professor Kumar, NBS needs competition. I mean, needs dissemination, a strong to recognize, to compete with the well-established standards in the water resource engineering. So, next slide, please. Okay, so the next is if we came to the, we have said so far the nature-based solution and its capability. So through several data assessment and a survey of several databases, we have done almost 386 NBS case studies in our OPERANDUM projects with our lovely partners, and we found that most of the NBSs are implemented to address floods, and then followed by the storm surge and drought and erosion and the heat waves. So nowadays, most of the NBSs are utilized for the floods and water-related hazards. So this is to show you where we are and where is NBS. Next slide, please. Okay, so next to this, let's give an overview of what is the benefit of using NBS. We have done through survey and literature review and published one paper on the classification of databases and database of nature-based solution in the natural hazards. In this paper, we have done cost-benefit analysis and the potentials of nature-based solution. From the figure A is just based on the 300 case studies, we have analyzed that floods are mostly managed by a hybrid approach. Again, the other approach is also designed to manage floods and the other hazards. When we look into the heat waves, are mostly managed by the green approaches. So this shows you the potential of NBS. That means floods are mostly managed by the hybrid, and as overall in Europe, around 56% of NBSs are designed to manage flood risks. What about the other risks? It's questionable. Okay, again, the remaining 44% are designed to manage the other hydrometeorological hazards. The second figure is to show you how different NBSs are used or designed to prevent the sea waves and decrease the sea waves or damping the sea waves. So salt marshes in the coastal reduces the flood waves, and the coastal erosion is up to 72% and 70% individually. Next slide, please. Here is the cost benefit of NBS overall cost benefit of NBS. This figure shows you the comparison between GRAY approach and different NBSs implemented against hydrometeorological hazards. So the comparison between NBS and the GRAY measures shows around 60% of hydrometeorological hazards are managed cost effectively. As we said, Professor Kumar said previously, it is cost effective. Yes, we practically proved that it is around 85% it will be cost effective. The other thing we can draw from this figure is coastal reefs and wetland restoration provides a maximum cost benefit or a benefit to cost ratio. Even when we use them jointly, they can provide more protections than the GRAY approach. In other way, when I'm just concluding the benefits of the NBS, the benefits of NBS and its effectiveness as well as performance is depends on location, design, typology, environment, or climatic conditions. So we need to, designers, we need to consider when they are going to design, they need to consider which kind or which type of NBS are going to fit their location and the type of risk they are going to address. They need to take into account this. Next slide. So all of the information which I addressed so far are comprehensively presented in this paper, which covers revised concepts, classification of NBS, natural hazard and nature-based solution databases, barriers, and the gaps of NBS is well summarized here. So I would suggest you to go through this paper if you're interested. Next slide, please. Okay, the next slide, I guess this is my last slide of the day. I think so. What we missed so far, or what is the challenge when we just think of nature-based solution? From the beginning, nature-based solution it's introduced. I mean, before like 10 years or 12 years age, it's early on its early stage. That means it is hampered or hindered by so many factors. For example, 3 main factors: physical factors, economical factors, social factors. So when I give in detail, for example, lack of limited knowledge about the methods and assessing them and validating them, and as other, like there is no evidence on the environmental and the social trade-off. This also lack of guidance and to follow, to implement, to replicate the information for their usability. And the other thing is, which is we missed so far, is like robust science-based evidence on the benefit between like GRAY and nature-based solutions, which can give confidence to the funders or policymakers to prefer NBS than the GRAY approaches. The other most important point from this slide is we have policy fragmentation, like the NBS mainstreaming between science, practice, and the policy is still it's very weak. So what we need to do, we need to build a bridge, a strong bridge to connect those 3 things together. There are also lack of tools, holistic kind of tools for the communication and the dissemination of nature-based solution. So limited or no evidence and experience-based guidance about the climate change-proof NBS. For example, there is no standards or guidances to choose climate-proof NBS types. For example, species selection and other type of NBS selection, there is no standard in the guidelines. So there is also a challenge to monitor and evaluate their benefits because there is no standard or rational kind of methodologies designed for NBS. This is also hinders their wider application and replication as well. There is also a lack of quantitative evidences to upscale, to replicate, to reuse, and to share them to the other places. So those are the challenges which they hinder the wider application and implementation of NBS. Thank you very much. Now, I guess I think I will pass the floor to Professor Prashant.
Yeah, thank you, Shinsei.
Yeah, thank you very much.
So, so what we have been discussing so far, looking into why do we need it, what kind of you can expect in future, and what kind of gaps actually that exist when it comes to the nature-based solutions. So, so I think the one of the interesting and the important things are that how can we foster the wider application of these nature-based solutions. So, so one of the concept actually, which has been kind of coined by the OPERANDUM project, is the OALs, which is the open air laboratories. So what does this do is it can basically be used as a living experiment where you can co-create things, you can co-design things, you can co-implement things, and then you could assess actually the efficacy of those those the innovative, the nature-based solutions, and that could allow that can combine the existing research and the innovation the process, and bring the public-private and the people partnership to engage the researchers with the community to investigate those environmental issues. So as part of this the OPERANDUM project, there's been these number of OLs which has been established, which are in UK, in Ireland, in Germany, Austria, Italy, Greece, and going in Finland, and then going beyond to China, Hong Kong, and Australia. And the major focus has been on looking into these hydro-meteorological hazards. So, for example, some of these OLs are looking into the landslides, some looking into the floods, some on the drought, some looking in the coastal erosion, storm surge, and the nutrients and the sediment loading. So these OLs, as NT briefly mentioned, one of the OLs, where they have been working on the nutrients and sediment loading. The similar kind of the activities in greater details are kind of they're going in there. So what these OLs are using is a user-centric the co-design approach, where there is a involvement of the stakeholders, researchers, and the end users. Because the fact is that you could devise a solution, but if there is no acceptance of the solution by the real users, then it has got a hindrance in terms of its application in the real world. So the idea there is basically to overcome actually those barriers and come up with the these tested solutions that could increase the uptake of these nature-based solutions in future. So I will not go in detail about the OLs. So there will be detailed talks on the OLs in the upcoming, the OPERANDUM webinars. So you will, you will be most welcome, and the things will come to your way, possibly in one way or another. You could, attend those webinars. So one of the key processes basically in the operation is this co kind of thing. So which is talking about the co-planning. In terms of identifying the hazards, impact modeling, and the scenario modeling, looking into this the selection of the most suitable the sites and the NBS, then the co-designing of those NBS with the engagement of the multidisciplinary and evaluation of the policy framework, and then the co-management of them. So once they are installed, basically, how do you do the monitoring and evaluation? So again, there will be a webinar in future which will focus mainly on this aspect actually. So this is part of this, this initial the work package. So if you're interested to know more about those things in details, then some of our the expert colleagues will be talking about these processes in more detail. And if you're keen on knowing more about the operationalization of these nature-based solutions for the natural hazards, which basically the focus has been on the ones which has been covered in the OPERANDUM, you're most welcome to look onto this paper, which can give you a pretty good summary of the wealth of the information which is available, around this topic area. So just to summarize, basically, so the the hydro-meteorological hazards. So if you look at the kind of trend over the past 30 years or so in Europe, so the floods and heat waves have been the that has impacted the most. And these NBS are being promoted, but as we mentioned, that they have a huge potential, but they still, they are not as complete as you can think of the civil engineering, the solutions, which are available in the form of the kind of grey infrastructure. So there is always a there is a gap actually. But the potential also shows that these solutions in the 21st century could really, could be the key, especially if you're looking into the healthy and the kind of resilient, the society. And the green approaches, they have been contributing quite significantly in buffering the communities, not from these hydrometeorological hazards, but also providing quite a lot of the biodiversity and the ecosystem services, like we mentioned earlier about the mental health and well-being and the air pollution mitigation and so on. And followed by the hybrid and the blue approaches, which has been used in several of these case studies, which CISE have been talking about them. So the performance of this NBS that depends on the number of features, which we discussed earlier, and that also require actually then the bridging the gaps between the policies and the research and the practice. So there is quite a lot actually still needed, to fill those gaps, to make them the more popular choice actually for the planners when they are using it. So the implementation process, it requires the co-design, the participatory kind of approach. As I mentioned, there will be the future webinars will cover actually these topics. The OLs are really the key in terms of the fostering their intake, upscaling, replication, and implementation. Because one of the issues usually you see that we applied actually this nature-based solution in this place, but could we upscale it on a larger kind of domain, and can we replicate it in completely different area? So these kind of the opportunities for the testing and implementing has been provided by the OLs in the kind of the operandum. So I think to ensure the NBS kind of the potential is exploited properly and taking into decision making. So there is a gap actually in terms of the research, which the number of these projects, including this one, is trying to fill into the research assessment, management, and the implementation and demonstration of these things. So in a way, the way forward in terms of the general recommendations, that includes in terms of the research. So there is quite a lot to do in terms of building the background and the research and the science actually on the topic in terms of the effectiveness of these the nature-based solutions at different scales under changing climate conditions, which the NT was mentioning that these things could work now, but whether they will do in future, and this is a very important consideration. Looking into the cost-benefit analysis is very important from the urban planning and the policymakers' perspective, because this is always a kind of a point whether if you are spending something, what are the benefits actually we are going to get in future. The monitoring and evaluation methods and the tools, so they do exist. They could be used actually from the conventional the methods, and there is a scope in terms of what could be the best tools and the best methods actually for individual nature-based solutions and assessing the specific hazards. So there are a number of these things in terms of the research. The similar kind of things you could think in terms of their wider application in terms of the future implementation, in terms of demonstrating and sharing the experience. But this is very important. So if one can see that this thing is working in real life in one place, then that gives confidence for others to kind of have their uptake into the the other places. And the promoting the more of the co-creation and the participatory approaches. Financial support is quite important, because the investment in terms of implementing them is still limited. And one of the issues has been that it's been taken for granted that the trees and the shrubs and all these things, they always present. So why do we actually need to invest into it? But the fact is that if there is a more investment or the public investment into this this kind of the solutions, that means that could allow actually a proper design and exploiting their potential to the larger extent. The political support is another kind of and thing, because there could be like a very different take in different countries or in different domains. So this is another kind of an area to look for the the implementation. So planning process is again another important thing in terms of the long-term stability, the funds, upscaling, replication, public acceptance, and looking into the environmental and the social benefits. So these are like the number of these bits in there. But just to very clear, kind of say that there is a need for the knowledge sharing among different countries, different projects. So there is a less replication or the duplication of the efforts, and there is a more the more understanding and more kind of the confidence in those solutions. And there has been a need for standardizing these methods, actually, especially for the monitoring and evaluation, that could allow the comparability of these solutions in different places. And there is a more kind of research required to develop a holistic methodologies which can routinely and constantly monitor and evaluate the performance of these these interventions. So the three papers which we put it in, so these are here again, just to summarize. If you are interested, then you can always go into deep in some of the basic concepts around these topic areas we covered today. So you're most welcome to have a kind of a read on them. And if you wanted to go even further into details, then these are arising from these three deliverables which were kind of produced as part of the project. So deliverable 1.1, which focused on the mapping, characterization, and critical evaluation of the existing NBS. It is almost 215 pages, which has been contributed by a vast number of the experts from a number of institutions across the Europe. So there is a fantastic opportunity to kind of go into detail if you are interested in very specific the topics that goes beyond those publications. And then if you are interested in understanding the risk and evaluation related to the OLs, then there is another deliverable which is almost around 123 pages, with again a vast majority of the partners with the very kind of the diverse expertise has come together to write this deliverable. So these are available onto these the hyperlinks, which I'm sure that this presentation will be made available, and you can always look into these reports. And then there is a recent deliverable which was submitted around the co-design and the co-development as part of this very first work package. So this will be made public very soon. So this is a deliverable which has been led by the colleagues from the LUC, where there is quite a lot actually you could see in terms of the co-design and the co-development process. So and I presume there might be a webinar at some point where you could also have the summary of what's been done actually in there, in the future kind of deliverables. So with that, I would say thank you very much for your time and listening to this talk. And these are the three presenting authors here, and you can always drop an email or to any of us if there are any questions related to this presentation and beyond. So with this slide, I would like to thank all the speakers, and thank you very much everyone to listen to this talk. So over to you, Jahara or Irina.
Thank you. Thanks very much, Prashant, and thanks to all of you for this very nice presentation on the state of the art of how nature-based solutions can be and are being used towards reducing environmental risks. The work presented here really builds the foundation of the OPERANDUM project, and comprises a huge body of work which was very nicely condensed down in this talk to convey the main highlights of this research. So thank you very much once again. Also, apologies, I realized that some participants had trouble accessing the meeting in the beginning. I see most of the issues were resolved. We'll make sure to, well, solve any potential technical problems for coming events, but with online events, yeah, it takes a few sessions to iron out all these potential problems. So we have some time now for questions. Feel free to write them in the chat. So far, I think we don't have any questions, which hopefully means that it was all very clear. Maybe meanwhile, people can please write in the chat box whenever you come up with a question, but maybe a question, two questions actually from my side. So you talked about barriers and challenges related to the uptake of nature-based solutions. Maybe if you could elaborate a little bit on approaches that may help to overcome these barriers, both from technological and social perspective, just maybe an example from the project without going into too much detail. And the other question is, obviously underlying this work is a vast body of case studies and literature reviews. And maybe could you talk a little bit about what the process looked like in collecting these case studies? Maybe where did the references come from, and which countries maybe are represented, or which countries were these drawn from?
Yeah, so these are really good questions. So maybe I could let Antti give it a go onto the first one. Because he's leading one of those OELs, in Finland. So do you want to say something about it first, Antti? I think you're on mute.
Yes, can you hear me now? Yep. So a really good question, and I can say I can give an example from the Finnish case. So we are dealing with the forest area, which are causing which is causing the trouble for our open air laboratory, the lake. And as you might know, the forests are not owned by the project. So we are dealing in an area which is owned by private citizens, large companies, small companies, forest companies, and so on. So now in our case, when we are developing and designing the nature-based solutions, we have to do it together with those stakeholders. That's the number one key issue, because otherwise we cannot do anything. And that has been the first and really important step to making everybody who is involved, the regions and locations we are doing our work, research, we have to have the permission and green light from the owners of the land areas. And in our case, we have been really surprised and happy how actually cooperative the stakeholders have been. So they have also noticed the same problem and challenge of the waters getting poorer and poorer every year, and something has to be done about it. And in this kind of area, in the middle of forests and in middle of environment, let's say, the nature-based solutions are actually the optimal way of tackling this challenge.
Yeah. So just to add, actually, so Antti covered, the very practical issues in terms of, the challenges in the while you're implementing them. But you asked about the technical and societal challenges. So technical issues still remains in terms of, having the evidence base. So, for example, if we say that if we put, let's say, the green barriers here, this is going to reduce the flood by what percentage? So the thing is that if you wanted to make a stronger case, then what you need is have this evidence base, which can allow actually the planners or whoever is considering them in future, they can get a confidence and they can apply it. But in most cases, the issue has been that it's taken for granted, because we think that everywhere it's green and blue. Why do we need to bother about it? It's taking its own own things, which is perfectly fine. But if you want to innovate actually those, then you have to come up with the new approaches. You need to exploit actually their potential. So there has been this kind of the technical challenges. The societal bits is more some of the bits are related to the psychological as well. That look, as I mentioned, these things exist. So, do we really need to have a specific, the quota of the funds, or do we really need to think, the more about them? And the people like actually doing that, but when you demonstrate actually that this thing could work, then this will improve actually their kind of the wider the uptake or the these kind of solutions. So, is there anything else, Sister, you wanted to add to it?
No, I'm just actually typing. There are some questions in the chat, so I was answering.
Yeah. So the another question you asked about the background search, actually, how do we collect actually these databases and so on. So it has been a very systematic approach. So where we looked into the publications on the topic areas, which has been published. So which is basically the more kind of a peer-reviewed literature in the past several decades. And then we try to synthesize those, those publications. So this has been the one stream of, the information. The another stream of information has been the credible reports. So, for example, there has been quite a lot of these reports published by the UNESCO or the UN or WHO, and there are a number of these reports actually which have been peer-reviewed and they are creditable. So we consider actually those reports in there. So this has been another source of information. There's been some gray literature. The gray literature is, for example, if you're talking about some of these innovative solutions of the nature-based solutions, so we really don't have them into the published literature. So that means that we have gone into the market, try to look into what are the options available in there and try to build understanding around it. So this has been the third line of the information which we have collected. The fourth line has been these case studies, which Sisi was mentioning, over 300. So this has been collected through the intensive kind of the online search, where we could see that there has been put it in there and try to build those stories. And then there has been another kind of a string of research, which has been these existing databases. There has been quite a few existing databases that cover in there. So in the background, there has been quite a lot of the efforts gone into understanding actually where things are, and then try to pick those stuff and then try to conclude actually based on that. Of course, they might not be complete because things are moving forward with time, but this provides basically a quite a comprehensive and a very good confidence in the data which has been presented today or been in these deliverables.
Well, thank you very much. Thanks a lot for answering.
Okay, on the top of, maybe I will say something on the top of
yes, we have some
Professor
questions.
Prashant. You asked actually where most of the databases are located. We actually, when we summarized this overall collected databases, most of them are located in EU, in Europe. Almost of the 368, around almost 285 are located in EU. Whereas, for example, Austria and like Africa, they are very rare in number of case studies and application nature-based solution. That means NBS databases are Eurocentric. They are centered in Europe in terms of allocation. Thank you very much.
Yeah, so there is a comment from the point from Silvana, who left on the comment. So he's the coordinator of the project. I think there will be a webinar possibly in future around these databases. And what's happening is that all these databases is going into another work package, which is work package 7, where colleagues are developing this the IKP database. So that means that people don't need to read through all this information. It could be more visual, and all this data information will be there. So that will provide an excellent kind of platform for the users to kind of exploit this knowledge for their own use, and try to understand also that when you are adopting any particular solution, then you wanted to first know that how much, what are the pros, what are the benefits of this, what are the disbenefits of it, what kind of the confidence you can have in terms of the KPI indicators and so on. So a number of these attributes have been kind of embedding into this, the GeoRQP database. So if you follow these webinars, I'm sure that you will be getting a lot of information. It was just on the tip of iceberg, actually, which we presented today. So there is a more substantial contents, actually, you will see in the future, the webinars.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. Also, thank you, Antti, for responding to questions in the chat. Yes, so I think we're more or less coming to an end here. I see there's one more question maybe that we can take. From Alicia, it's in your experience, where do we stand with applying these solutions in high disaster-prone areas or soon after a major disaster? This often complicates the solution, but it also underscores its necessity. Maybe just very briefly go into this question and then we can close the session.
Yeah, so I guess so this is a really good question in terms of what you could do, but I guess the challenge here is, as you rightly said, that it complicates the kind of the situation when the disaster has happened. During the disaster, you're looking into the crisis management, and before it or anticipating it, then you're looking into the prevention. So I don't see any problem in terms of foreseeing actually this kind of issues in a particular region and then planning it ahead. And I presume that the most of the work which is going in the OLs, that is kind of testing the new solutions. So I'm not sure whether we have personally, maybe the Antti, you might have any experience of having these solutions. But I guess maybe beyond this project, I'm not sure, but if you have something more to add to this particular question.
Yeah, so I totally agree. So personally, and how I see how important EU especially considers the nature-based solutions, because it's one, let's say, I would say it's one important stone in the cornerstone in the Green Deal, for example, how to take more these environmental solutions to tackle the whole climate change and this whole environmental challenge that we are facing aboard. So I would say this is what Operandum is doing is highly, I would say, almost a flagship for this whole topic in Europe. And these things will come into practice, and I would say quite soon.
Yeah.
Well, thank you all. I think then with that, we will close this session. Thank you so much to our speakers. Thanks also to all participants. The recording of this event will be available on the Operandum website in the next few days. So I think the link was shared in the chat. I would also like to inform you, and it was mentioned by Prashant as well, that more technical and methodological webinars from the Operandum project will be following. I would also like to announce that the next Operandum webinar will take place on December 9th at 1:30, so same time, CET, titled Co-Creating Nature-Based Solutions, Why, How, and With Whom. So we hope to welcome you back for this event. And until then, stay safe and take care, and hope to see you soon. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay,
bye.
bye.
Bye.